I almost didn't go to that dinner. 3 weeks back from deployment, still sleeping in 2-hour intervals because my body hadn't remembered yet that the threat level was 0, still reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there when the apartment building's fire alarm went off at 2 in the morning. And my husband Marcus wanted me to come to his family's Sunday dinner and meet his brother for the first time. I said yes because Marcus asked me to, and because I had spent the previous 7 months in conditions that made a difficult family dinner seem, by comparison, entirely manageable. I did not anticipate Derek. Derek Calloway was Marcus's older brother by 4 years, a Navy lieutenant, which he mentioned within the first 6 minutes of my arrival, approximately once per topic of conversation, the way people mention things they believe establish a hierarchy. He was good-looking in the way of people who have been told they are too often and have organized their personality around the information. He had the particular energy of a man who walks into every room assuming he is the most impressive person in it and adjusts his behavior accordingly. He looked at my civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse, the deliberate choice of someone who had spent 7 months in uniform and wanted, for one Sunday evening, to not be identified by what she wore, and he made his assessment. I saw him make it. I have watched enough people make assessments in the field to recognize the process. His assessment was, not a threat, not relevant, probably here as an accessory to Marcus. He was wrong about all 3. Dinner was going fine. His mother's cooking was genuinely excellent. Marcus's father was asking me careful, thoughtful questions about where I'd grown up, and I was navigating the standard new partner meets family social dynamics with the same calibrated attention I bring to most things. When Derek looked down the table at me with the particular smile of someone who has decided it's time to demonstrate something. He said, "So you're in the Navy too, right? What do you do?" I said I was a pilot. He smiled wider. Not at me, at the table. The way people smile when they're performing for an audience. "A pilot," he said. "That's great. Let me guess," he paused for effect, "you've probably never actually been on a real mission. Am I right? Most of you pilots, you're mostly training runs. Simulator time." The table went a little quiet. At the far end, Marcus's grandfather, a man named William Calloway who had been eating quietly and had not said more than 12 words since I arrived, looked up from his plate. He looked at me. He said, "What's your call sign?" Derek's smile vanished. "I'll be honest about something. I don't talk about what I do. Not because I'm not proud of it, I am, deeply, in the specific way you are proud of something that cost you years of your life and some things that cost more than that. I don't talk about it because I learned early in my career that the people worth impressing don't need me to tell them, and the people who need me to tell them are usually not worth impressing." Marcus knew the broad outline. He knew I was a naval aviator. He knew I had done multiple deployments. He knew that the gap in my service record that I'd mentioned, the 3 years that aren't in any publicly accessible document, was real and was not something I could explain in detail over dinner. He had not told Derek any of this, partly because Derek had not asked about me before I arrived and partly because Marcus had the particular quality of someone who understands that his wife's story is hers to tell or not tell as she chooses. What Derek had assembled from visual evidence was, woman, early 30s, civilian clothes, slightly quiet, probably some kind of desk job. He was wrong by approximately several decades of combined experience and 3 distinguished service medals, one of which I had been specifically asked not to discuss in unclassified settings. Marcus had told me about his grandfather the way people tell you about someone they genuinely respect rather than simply love, with the specific words they use for people who have earned something. William Calloway was 78 years old. He had served in the Navy for 31 years. He had retired as a Rear Admiral. He had been, in the specific years when it mattered most, part of the development of naval aviation doctrine that was still in use in modified form today. He had been at the family dinner every Sunday for as long as Marcus could remember, eating quietly and asking careful questions and never once offering an opinion that hadn't been requested. He had not, in Marcus's memory, ever been visibly interested in anything Derek said at the dinner table. This was not unkindness. It was the particular disengagement of a man who had spent his career distinguishing between substance and performance and had very little patience left, at 78, for the latter. When he asked me for my call sign, he asked it the way people who actually know what a call sign means ask for one, not as a conversation topic, but as a specific piece of identifying information that he wanted in order to place me accurately. I told him. The recognition on his face was immediate and completely unperformed. He set down his fork. He looked at me for a moment with the expression I had seen on exactly 3 people in my career, the expression of someone who knows what the call sign refers to and is recalibrating everything they had assumed about the person across the table. He said, "You're Viper." I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "To no one in particular and therefore to everyone, HM." That single syllable, from a retired rear admiral who had spent 31 years in naval aviation, landed on the table with considerably more weight than Derek's entire opening assessment. I should explain what my call sign means, because Derek clearly did not know and because it matters to the story. Call signs in naval aviation are not chosen. They are given by your squadron, usually after an incident or a characteristic or occasionally a mistake that nobody lets you forget. They are permanent, they travel with you across assignments, and within the specific world of people who work with aircraft and in combat conditions. They function as a compressed record of who you are and what you've done. I was given the call sign Viper during my second deployment, after an engagement over the South China Sea that I am not going to describe in detail here because some of it remains classified and because the rest of it is not the kind of thing I tell at Sunday dinners regardless of what the classification status is. What I will say is that the engagement lasted 11 minutes and involved decisions that I made alone, at altitude, in conditions that did not allow for consultation, and that the outcome of those decisions was that 3 aircraft returned to the carrier that would not have returned otherwise. The dinner changed after William said my call sign. Not dramatically, nobody stood up, nobody made a speech. It changed the way rooms change when the distribution of information shifts, quietly, and then completely. Derek's mother asked William how he knew me. William said he didn't know me personally, but that he knew of me, which in the context of his 31 years in naval aviation was a specific statement rather than a general one. Marcus's father asked me, carefully, whether I was the pilot involved in the South China Sea incident he had read about in a naval affairs journal the previous year. I said that there were aspects of that incident I couldn't discuss. He nodded with the immediate understanding of someone who knew what that meant. Marcus watched all of this from his end of the table with the specific expression of a man who loves his wife and has never once pushed her for information she hasn't offered, and who is now watching the room slowly understand what he has always quietly known. Derek was quiet. Not the deliberate silence of someone making a point. The specific recalibrating silence of someone who has made an error of assessment and is processing the full scope of it. After dinner, when Marcus's mother was making coffee and Derek had gone to help her in the way people help in kitchens when they need a moment out of a room, William Calloway came to stand beside me near the window. He asked me 3 questions. They were specific questions, the kind that can only be asked by someone who already knows enough to ask them, questions about doctrine, about a specific tactical decision I had made that had been discussed at a senior level, about what I thought the implications were for a particular operational challenge the Navy was currently working through. I answered all 3. We talked for 22 minutes. At the end of the 22 minutes, William said, "I'm going to make a call on Monday." He said it in the particular tone of someone for whom making a call means something specific and consequential. I said, "You don't need to do that on my account." He said, "I'm not doing it on your account. I'm doing it because the person I'm calling needs to know that you're back and available." He went to find his coffee. I stood at the window for a moment and thought about what he'd said. Then Marcus appeared at my elbow with a cup of tea and the quiet smile of someone who had watched the evening from a comfortable distance and was satisfied with how it had resolved. He said, "I told you the dinner would be fine." I said, "You told me it would be manageable." He said, "Same thing." It was not the same thing. But I let it go. I've thought about that dinner a number of times since. Not because of Derek. Derek is not someone I think about much, which I suspect is true of most people in his life, though he would be surprised to hear it. I think about it because of William. William Calloway made the call on Monday. I found out about it 6 weeks later, when I received a communication that I was not entirely expecting, regarding a posting that had not been publicly announced. The posting was significant. The communication was from someone whose name I had known for years without expecting to encounter directly. Derek also made a call, as it turned out. He called Marcus the following Tuesday. Derek, apparently, had looked me up after the dinner. He had found what there was to find in the publicly accessible record, which was considerably less than the full picture but considerably more than he had anticipated. He wanted Marcus to know that he hadn't meant any offense. Marcus said he'd pass it on. I told Marcus there was no need to reply. There is a particular kind of person who has done difficult things in difficult conditions and who does not need the people who doubted them to revise their assessment. The revision happens eventually, because reality is persistent and the record is what it is. I don't need to be in the room when it happens. I was a pilot before Derek sat down at that dinner table. I was a pilot while he was performing for the family. I was a pilot when William said my call sign and Derek's smile disappeared. I remained a pilot when I stood at the window talking doctrine with a retired rear admiral for 22 minutes. None of that changed based on what Derek thought. But I'll admit, and this is the honest part, the part one don't usually say out loud, that the look on his face when William said my call sign was something I will carry with me for a long time. Not because I needed it, but because it was, in its own quiet way, absolutely precise.